right. Yes. Welcome, everybody. We are alive. We are alive in 2025. What a crazy time to be here, to be indigenous, to be whoever you are, however you came to us today. We're so happy to dive into this really important conversation. But before we dig in, as people come into the room, as we welcome you into the digital circle, I want to ask everybody to put in the chat. Just let us know exactly where are you at, on whose land, where do you stand, what is your plan, or just maybe your name and your clan. But put in the chat where you're at and where you're from. We want to know, and so we can give you a little thumbs up or thumbs right, left, don't matter which way. We got so many different type of ways to de-stress. Take a deep breath. Remember, you're here, made it ancestrally to atmosphere. Sky woman to Turtle Land, Turtle Island. The muskrat brought us up from that soil from the bottom of the sea so we could be here. Each one teaching our destiny creation stories. So many glories. Put it in the chat. And my people, where you at? Where you at? My name's Daniel French. We're just warming up the vibe. In case you're wondering, why is this guy rapping? I want to talk about immigration. We'll get there. Hold your horses. Go ahead and put in the chat. I want to shout out, we got Jamie here. Yeah, Jamie's out in Sandy, Utah. Out here on Paiute Ute land. Paiute Ute lands. My name is Daniel French. I'm out here in actually Pueblo territory. I'm on the move. And we've got our amazing guest speakers. They're going to introduce themselves. But if they want to put in the chat where they're at, that would be cool too. So let's walk in. Everybody just come in and put the first thought at the top of your mind coming to this session. What's on your mind? Where are you at? Whose land are you on? Let's hear about it. So we want to give some shout outs. We got our homie Frankie here out from Yurok Indian Reservation. Plan to fix the world. I wonder what is his frustration, but he got imagination. He figures it out. We're out here with Natalie from Eureka who trouts or maybe salmons. They let the fish go free. Undam the land and let the fish grow free. Shout outs to Angie on Gabrielino territory. Gabriela Armenta is out there with the Kawiyas doing bird songs all day long. We got to rock it like a marathon where we keep it running like a tarragon. Spices in our food, yo, we keep it spicy, we keep the loop grooving. Shout outs to Chocma folks. We got the Chickasaws in the place. Shannon Yoshi had to spoke. So Janene Yazzie, Danae coming glazzy, feeling here so excited and happy. So we got Mackenzie at the Baskin from Anchorage, but out here in LA. So we're tankering, yo, we're tinkering with our collective messaging, with our framing and disrespecting. So shout outs to all the people on the line in the room. We want to welcome you and give thanks for you soon. We all made it another beautiful day to be indigenous on this land and how we pray. So I'm going to turn this music down. Let us take just a second to feel the power in the room, the potential. Together, there is so much we can do. Ice would have us feel frozen. But one of the things we want to talk about today is how do we get unfrozen from being a spectator to becoming an actor in this story that's unfolding. So with that, one of the things we want to talk about today is how do we stand with our undocumented relatives in this time? How do we stand with each other in this time that we're going through? So with that, my name is Daniel French. I'm going to cut the beat. I'm going to bring it down. Sego sewa gwego waga tsanuni tiga igis Daniel French Unyats kanya gahak kani wagawanjoda ga nawage ni de wagenu danu Los Angeles gitarun. Daniel French, I'm Mohawk, Chicano from a community called Gahnawage, born and raised mostly in LA, and I'm really excited to be here with my ancestors and yours. We are here to get into the space of what is happening. How do we interpret what's happening? How can we sharpen our analysis, our knowledge, ultimately so that we can act? Because knowledge without action is just data on the table. Yeah, so I'm gonna just introduce some of our speakers. But one thing, as I introduce them, I'd like you to put in the chat, if you're here, what are you seeing? What are people noticing in your communities? It could be on the news. What are you sensing? Maybe are you feeling afraid to go out? Or are you feeling like confident? You're good. What are people noticing that's happening? And as that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce three of our speakers. We have Janene Yazzie here, Director of Policy and Advocacy for NDN Collective. Janene is experienced in community organizing. She has worked at the intersection of climate change, of water security, food security. She's worked at governance levels, local community levels across different tribal nations and beyond. So expect to hear that the expertise from Janene as we're here on the call. We have Frankie Myers, who is currently serving a second and final term as vice chairman of the Yurok Tribe. He is a consultant. He has this really cool name for his company. It's called Fix the World Consulting. You know, we got to hear more about that because the world needs some fixing. Yeah, or some undoing for sure. So we're really excited to hear about your experience and leaning on that, especially in undamming the Klamath River, letting the salmon go free. How do we bring back our natural ecosystems and get back to forward? And last but not least, we have Shannon Speed here. She's a professor at UCLA, written like at least 7 books. I mean, who writes 7 books? Not me. I'll tell you that. I've written 7 songs, 7 multiple albums, but Shannon takes the cake on the book writing today, and has done a lot of work around Indigenous women's rights, around Indigenous folks and being incarcerated, Indigenous folks standing up for their rights. And it's so much more to say about everybody, but I wanted to keep it short and sweet for y'all. Janene, maybe I'd love to invite you. Can you just share maybe 2 things that you're seeing, and just 2 things that you're seeing happening right now? And then can you give us an introduction to, for those of us who maybe are unfamiliar or want to be reminded, immigration from a Native perspective or from an Indigenous perspective? Just lay some of that out for us. How can we re-look with new eyes or old eyes at what's happening? 2 things that you're seeing, and how do you see it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the top 2 things, I mean, we're seeing a lot of shifts and changes, some of it familiar and following along familiar patterns of like the racial profiling and the misclassification of who we are as Indigenous peoples because we're brown, but also like the increased policing and use of force in and around our communities, going along hand in hand with that increased racial profiling. And I think what was really notable in the shift of this administration, because as you know, many of the immigration policies aren't very different across political parties, but the way in which they're carried out can be very different, the visibility of the violence. And in this particular case, like the particular form of white supremacy and just the link that we're seeing with violence against many different communities, and the increased militarization of our police forces and our communities has had its own sort of evolution under this administration. But I think what was a real indicator for us as Indigenous peoples of how different this was like even back in November, like on November 19th, and on Navajo Nation, there was a white woman that reported a school of Native children that were out hiking on our own ancestral territories, that were part of a land-based school and that were doing their daily routine. And she reported them and did a TikTok video classifying them as undocumented immigrants that were, and showcasing them, posting videos of them as an indication of this like imaginary problem that is developed to stir up like white supremacist fervor and violence. And I think that, that really alarmed a lot of the local community who may not have really seen themselves as being targets of this type of like immigration laws and the type of violence that's associated with that. And so I think that was really like a clear indication that this was going to be different, and that we needed to pay more attention to what was going on. And we should have always been paying attention to what was going on, because their long history of the violence against especially Black and Brown migrants into this country is rooted in the history of settler colonialism and the building of the imperial like power and force that the United States is. And we know and have had that lived experience of seeing our homelands like broken up and divided by these imaginary colonial lines and by these concepts of private property, and the ways that that broke up our communities, and especially here, like from California and throughout the greater Southwest, that history of how it's broken up our nations, our families, and our communities, and our relationships all throughout the Americas, everything from trade to cultural exchange to food exchange. We had thriving interconnected relationships throughout the Americas prior to colonization. And so I think that this has been a moment where, even though there's been a lot of fear and there's been a lot of paralysis around what to do in face of this extreme form of violence that we're seeing in our communities, it's also a moment to pause and reflect about just how well situated we are to both understand the history and the roots of it, but to also understand that we have always been fucking resisting this type of violence, and we're going to continue to do that. And like this is really just a challenge to us to do it better and to do it in a way that is restore our relationships to each other across our native nations and across these colonial borders. But I'll stop there.
Janene, you just gave us like the cheat codes to the whole story. For anybody listening, I really thank you for breaking down so much. I feel like a dissertation could be written on just those 2 or 3 minutes. But I want to highlight just a couple things for folks if you're just tuning in. We're seeing racial profiling, right? Increase in force. We're also looking at the imaginary problem. This is being like inflated as something that is made up, like it's supposed to impact and ruin people's lives on their day-to-day basis, when in reality it's being used as a political tool to misguide people and cause them to cause harm to brown bodies in this case, Black and brown bodies. He also talked about how much is shared across not just brown folks, not just who we traditionally think of as native or indigenous people, Black and brown people, right? And there's a shared experience with the United States and the way that it's treated folks on these lands. So much more to be said. I just wanted to highlight a couple things there. Frankie, give us what's one thing that you're noticing that's really popping out to you these days, and what's something else you want to add as we're attempting to reframe or reorient our perspective on what's happening.
Well, first of all, I knew I should have asked to go first and not go behind either one of these women. I knew this was going to end up like this, but
I set you up.
I know I saw it coming. I saw it coming. That's okay. I'm good with it. Absolutely feel those words 100%. I think a lot of the conversations I'm having in my community and circle of friends as we're having these discussions, some of which pull back to really this conversation we've been having for a long time in Indian countries about boarding schools and about the generational impacts that we've seen from forced separation of children from their parents, and how deeply that has impacted all of our communities, my family included. My grandmother was taken from our people, sent to boarding schools. We've seen how impactful that has been in my own family and the devastation that has caused for generations. I think a lot of that is stirring up a lot of these feelings that we've had in Indian country, watching families being ripped apart, knowing, being a grandchild of some of these myself, understanding and knowing we're creating generational impacts for these families that are difficult to put back together. I think a lot of our generational trauma is coming back up, and having these conversations and looking at what is happening. My biological grandfather was an immigrant as well to this country. Having those conversations in my family and my circle is very much something that is happening at a different level now. And I think a lot of real frustration I think, as we talk about what's happening in immigration, as we talk about what's happening with undocumented peoples here, it's very hard for us to kind of separate this out and be like, oh, this isn't us. They're not talking about natives, but it's the tone, right? And they absolutely are talking about us. They are talking about us, right? I mean, these differences that we create between our groups here in North America, we know it's a sham. We know it's a falsehood. We know we're all the same people for this entire continent. We know we've been classified in different groups. I think it's also frustrating to know that, as Janine said, these aren't radically different policies than we've seen from the federal government for decades. This isn't so far off base than what we saw internment camps here in California, reservations for Indian people. This tone that we're hearing now, I think, is much more aggressive. So there's multiple problems. One, this has always been an issue. We need to solve these systemic policy issues that we have as a government, right? To sit back and say, oh, this is this administration doing this one terrible thing. We need to get fired up now. I think does a disservice to what's been happening in our communities and what we've seen happening in our communities for decades and decades. But the tone is absolutely alarming for any group of people who has had felt the impacts from this type of white supremacy rhetoric. It's very, very alarming where we'll end up. We know we're constantly under attack as Native peoples and trying to lessen our sovereign rights. I think this all goes into that same exact conversation. This isn't a matter of, oh, when it happens to our neighbors, it might happen to, nah, right? Like we've gone through this. We've seen this. This isn't a wait and see and we'll figure out what happens. I think we're very much in a struggle though in Indian country as well. Really trying to like figure out, where we land on this. Where do we show that support? How do we show up? Because the fact of the matter is, we don't love the U.S. government. We don't love the Mexican government either. There was wrongdoings done to our indigenous peoples here in California that are deep, that still remain in our communities. I think trying to figure out a way for us to really connect at a level that feels honest to us, that feels truthful to who we are and our experience in America, I think has been challenging to be honest with you, Daniel. And the conversations I've been having, I see that coming to fruition. How are we engaging? At what levels we're engaging? I think there's things specifically that I think make my community worried as well as we talk about how uh, much this country benefits from undocumented peoples at every level of our economic structure, including for us, our food sovereignty, knowing that that is such an issue for Indian country. We are always very highly dependent on our neighbors from the South helping us out and bringing food to our reservation. We're one of those places where it's always a conversation about food sovereignty. In 2014, the Yurok Reservation was recognized as a food desert. I think when we start talking about losing pieces of that, that is absolutely scary and also frustrating for us to figure out how we can stand on our own. It also highlights this generational impact that we've seen from the federal government on our tribal people. But more than anything, Daniel, I think we really need to find our space in this, figure out a way for us to be honest to ourselves and true to who we are, but also understanding we have a responsibility, right? As Native people, we have a responsibility in all of our stories and all of our cultures, wherever they're at, not trying to generalize this too much because every tribe, sovereign nation's independent, but all of us speak to in some form this responsibility as humans that we have one to another and the world around us. I think we oftentimes try to divide that out as we build our capacity and build our infrastructure as tribal governments and economic developments. But at our core, this is what we're supposed to be doing, right? Up here in the North, we call ourselves Fix the World people because we believe it's our responsibility here on Earth to bring balance to the world around us, both in the environment we live in and as a people. And when we see each other hurting, we're supposed to do what we can to restore that balance again. Those are some of the conversations that we've been having around here and in my group of folks.
Frankie, thank you so much for laying that out. One thing I really liked that you said is how do we show up? How do we show up in this moment? How do we show up for our relatives from the South? And even just that framing, I think, is useful for the room. Uh, are folks immigrants or are they indigenous folks?
Yeah.
Are they Latinos or are they indigenous people? Are they our relatives? Are they our neighbors? Are we already in relationship? Like acknowledging your what you shared about the responsibility to each other, and our relationships, right? And so I think that's really a useful language, I think, for the remainder of this conversation. Shannon, we kind of hoping that Dr. Speed, excuse me, we're kind of hoping that you fix the whole world in one comment, but let's not put so much pressure on it. Shannon, is there one thing that you want to add to this conversation as we think about immigration as indigenous people, as Native people? What's something you'd like to add in terms of context for people listening, before we kind of dive deeper into the debate, and also to Frankie's point, how we can show it? But just what would you add to this Native framing of immigration?
Well, you make it hard because what I really wanted to say was just like, yeah, what Janene and Frankie said. None done. But if I have to add, so I want to say this, and I don't want to, it doesn't necessarily help us in an immediate sense of like, how do we show up? What do we do right now? But so I wrote, one of those books was about indigenous women migrants from Mexico and Central America that I met in immigration detention centers in the US. And, I ended that book right when in the first Trump administration. And I was kind of making an argument there that that shift, like the rise of Trump, people actually voting for him, the rise of open white nationalism, open misogyny as kind of like a trope in the US, which we always knew were always there, of course, but like the way that it was being presented, that change of tone, that change of intent, was tied up with a crisis in capitalism. I believe that states shift their modes in order to facilitate changing phases of capitalism, and that neoliberalism was going into crisis. I think we can say neoliberalism is worldwide in full-fledged crisis now. And I'm saying this not to say I was right in the book, but I think sadly we're seeing, what we're experiencing now, the change of tone, but more importantly, the change of intent. I mean, this isn't a change in discourse. This is a change in what they're doing. I mean, this is an authoritarian regime. We are already in one. One thing I'll note, our brothers and sisters from the South are aware that there's a playbook for fascism, and we're in it. And people in the US don't realize that because they aren't paying attention to Latin American history. But if they were, they would know that we're going through all the steps right now. We're so far into it that I'm not even sure it's possible to get back. And I know that's not a hopeful message, except when you approach it from an indigenous perspective. What I argued in the last book, which was a very painful book about the violence that indigenous women experience in their migration journeys. People would ask me at the end of my talks, what do we do? What do we do? And I was like, I mean, you can engage in some reformist blah, blah, and we probably should, just to try to minimize the damage. But ultimately, for the violence against indigenous women and migrants to stop, we need to end the settler capitalist state. Well, the settler capitalist state is in crisis right now. It doesn't look good for us, but it is an opportunity. And I feel like indigenous people bring a unique perspective as peoples who have spent the last several hundred years maintaining some semblance of lifeways and logics that are distinct from that of the settler capitalist state. So if anyone's going to be able to think beyond the settler capitalist state, instead of just spending all our energy trying to like reform policy or like make the settler state somehow better for our people, which it is never going to be, maybe right now is the moment we actually have the power, because we bring the vision, we bring the knowledge of how other worlds are possible. So anyway, that's my bloody blah.
How other worlds are possible. Dr. Speed, eloquent as ever.
Lesson from the Zapatistas. I didn't make it up.
Hey.
Can't take credit for that.
And to your point, right, even just from your perspective that you shared from us is influenced by our relatives from the South, right? My
Totally.
tribe, the Mohawks, in the conversation I've had, even with elders and youngers and folks who know things, a lot of stories say that we come from further south. So we even some of us, depending on your creation story and your story, we were related to folks from down there, and so it's just a matter of time and migration as we've moved across the land. Uh,
Our migration story, we came from the West and very likely from the Gulf of Mexico it's like one of our origin stories for Chickasaw.
Sounds like you and I are cousins. So there's a lot here. I really liked what you said about imagining other worlds, and so I want to get to that place. And one of the steps before we get there is what are the needs we're noticing in our community? What are we can there's the conceptual look at what's happening. There's the kind of analysis. What are y'all hearing from your community? What are people asking for? I know, for example, I have a group of neighbors that I get together with in South Central Los Angeles, and my immediate neighbors, as well as my neighbors who are talking with our neighbors, we're hearing that people need groceries. People are afraid to leave their homes to go pick up prescription medicine, to pick up and drop off kids at school. We're seeing vendors whose businesses are devastated by the lack of foot traffic and attendance. So there's a whole economic destabilization, and so there's this need for people to show up and help distribute resources, food. There's also people are asking for presents, like show up at NDLON, the National Day Labor Organizing Network, has put out there, adopt a corner. That's how I met up with some neighbors. I was on a chat in a Zoom and saying, "Hey, anybody out here in South Central LA? You could do that if you're in the chat here today too. Like, hey, are any of y'all in the same area as me?" Um, what we're hearing from our neighbors are some of those things. What else are y'all hearing? What are the needs that are coming up, either in your communities, your tribal communities, or in your networks?
I'll hop on real quick. This was just a conversation we're having up here in Humboldt, Northern California, this last 2 weeks, and very similar conversations about making sure we're protecting our undocumented community, engaging. One of the threads I think that was really important for me to like grasp on, it's the ability for us to ensure accurate information is being distributed out to our communities and not creating a hysteria. We had a local shopping center that's, it's a couple hours from my house, but it's where everyone goes. It's, we all kind of congregate at the shopping center. And I don't know if at some point it was accurate or if it was never accurate, but there was discussions that, there was ICE there picking people up, and it caused a hysteria from our communities trying to get down there and protect and make sure that we had access to for our neighbors to get food. In fact, it never turned out to be true. That wasn't what was happening. It was a bad source to begin with, but it really spread this fear in our community of something that wasn't happening. And I think it also created this scenario where, because it was, found out to be false, um, there was a question, right? All of a sudden you have to question when you see that something else pops up and our neighbors are starting to gather, is that true? Is that going to be coming from some individual who has, brought in outside influence to create issues? And I think, we really did a lot of work on those forums to vet out everything that was happening to make sure that as we were giving resources and showing our support in areas that it was factually correct. And I think that's something for all of us. And it's exactly what you had said. It was a matter of, hey, reach out, talk to that individual specifically, make a connection with a human being, and verify whether that was happening, whether support was needed and going on. That, I think, was a bunch of the conversation. I think it got definitely better after that. Folks actually communicating and verifying information so that we were sending resources to the right the right area. Um, but I just wanted to add that piece.
Thanks so much, Frankie, for sharing that. access to accurate information and time in a timely manner, right? That allows the local community to respond in the way that it needs to. I want to just also make this invitation as our panelists are sharing what the needs that they're hearing from the community. Love to hear from y'all in the chat. And what are the needs that you're hearing in the community? What are people asking for? What do folks need? Because as we're thinking about how do we act, like you said, Frankie, how do we show up for our relatives in this time? It should be based on what people need, not just us doing stuff just to do stuff, right? Because we've seen time and time again, for example, during the fires, we saw lots of people donating clothes. And thank you, all you people who donated clothes and donated anything. But for a lack of coordination, at a certain extent, there was mounds of clothes at like the Rose Bowl, and then they're getting rained on, and then it can't go anywhere. So sometimes we have limited amount of time and effort and energy. How can we be most strategic? And that starts with understanding the needs of the people most impacted. It's kind of like what as tribal people, we're always asking governments and other people, listen to us. What are our needs? Listen to us and don't just do random stuff. So in the chat, please help us out. Anybody who's here, what are the needs you're seeing in the community? Janene, what are you seeing? What are the needs that are coming up?
Well, I think you and Frankie touched on some of the important stuff, but I'm like, how real can we get on here? But like there's also a real importance in not underestimating what we are fighting right now. So many of the problems and why there is a easy trigger point for like fear and hysteria is because we have all of these unmasked vigilantes and these deputized white supremacists running around our communities thinking that they're untouchable, and thinking that they can live out their violent settler colonial fantasies. And many of them look like us. Like this is why it's important to understand the roots of the violence in the system that we are up against right now, because we can and do have people who look exactly like us that are standing right beside these ICE officers, masked, unidentified, and just as violent and justifying, the violence against Black and brown bodies, against Black and brown children, and carrying this out for a paycheck. Like this is no different than the bounties that were put on Indigenous peoples in order to deputize settler colonialists to help with the removal efforts and the settlement of the West. And there's so many similarities with the bounties that are being given to these ICE agents and these operatives. And so I think that like the way that our networks were able to mobilize immediately to start to train and know your rights trainings is both a testament for how our movements have been evolving and building upon each other, for the importance of intersectionality and the ways that we resist and build these capacities and these political analyses in our communities. Because a lot of that came from the Black Lives Matter movement, from like having to fight police violence. A lot of that was founded in the logic and in the wisdom that came from the 60s and the civil rights movement, with the Red Power movement, AIM, Black Panthers. We have been learning and growing and evolving, and we have these tools that have been created for us from movement leaders from before, from community organizers, from so many like people filled with love and compassion for our shared liberation. And so to continue to evolve those and build those is really important, but to make it more easily accessible to those who most need it is also a very important challenge for us. One of the needs, understanding the history of imperialism, settler colonialism, and the ways that this created the conditions that we are now fighting against, it's important to note that many of the migrants that are coming into our country, whether they're brown or whether they're Black and from African continents or from the Caribbean, they are still still largely indigenous peoples, because this is what the system has done. It has been structured to displace, to remove, to target, to erase, to eliminate, to imprison, to criminalize indigenous peoples in order to facilitate the legalized, justify legalized theft of lands, territories, and resources, and to also facilitate a pipeline to enforce labor. And like that, the patterns there, the structure and the connections are already there. And so as a result of that, one of the issues that we have, even for those who mean to do well and to provide resources for many of our relatives who are seeking support, who are seeking legal assistance or other forms of aid, they speak indigenous languages. And so to only allow access to that, or to only be able to facilitate access to that when we're using colonizer languages, whether it's Spanish or English or whatever, or French, does a disservice to the people that we are meant to be helping and supporting. And so there's so much that we're being challenged to understand right now, and to bring into our political awareness, our understanding, and of our responsibility to humanity. And a huge part of that is understanding how many of our resources need to be translated into indigenous languages, and how that in itself is a form of resistance to the settler project and the violence that is being used, and its intention and the goals that it's trying to carry out. But I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Janine. You're spitting hot fire right now. There's so much here to unpack. The importance of learning from movements, the importance that you even highlighted, love for our shared liberation, that these movements, these efforts, it's love that inspires us. Let us never get that misunderstood. Ignore what you heard in the newspapers about, people standing up for their own dignity. That's love for self, love for each other. And your freedom, our freedom, is bound up in the freedom of our relatives and those around us, those that maybe aren't around us, but all that we share a shared history. So I don't want to put any extra words on what you shared. Hot fire. I'm going to jump to the chat here. There's a couple things that people named in terms of needs. One is more folks to join in rapid response, right? To show up when there's a raid, to get that information, to download that number, that app, to be informed and show up at least, and then to decide how you're going to participate. Are you documenting? Are you a body on the street? Are you de-escalating? Some people are doing direct action. They're engaging physically with these officers. There's a lot of ways that people are engaging with these situations. So that was a need that was mentioned. Also, street vendors needing to be bought out. Just like, hey, if you got some vendors, $250, $200, you could pay their whole day and they can go home and be safe for a day, right? And I've seen videos of people sharing that food with other folks on the unhoused people or people in the community. So that's another one. I'm looking at the chat. Claudia's got us here also talking about the need for all these folks who are now getting radicalized or motivated, inspired by what's happening, and they're participating. They're showing up at protests, community meetings. There's a need for assistance in planning, safety protocols. How do we protest? What are the tools? What are the mechanisms? So I think to your point, Janine, the OGs, let's call them the OGs, those who have experience. It's an opportunity for folks to step in and share their toolkits for those who are asking for them. Last thing is just food and rent and utilities being paid. That's from Kim out there in the Bay Area. So Shannon, I'd like to move to what are some action items that you feel folks can do in this time? What are some tangibles that you think folks can do to respond in this time?
It's kind of hard to say. I mean, I do want to sort of lift up what Janine was saying about indigenous languages. I think that's incredibly important. I serve on the board of CIELO, which is, you guys know, is an LA-based organization that provides services, particularly language interpretation services to indigenous folks from south of the border in California and throughout the US. And they're incredibly overtaxed, right? And with this new crisis, I mean, it's just, the need is tremendous. So finding ways to support the work that people like the interpreters of CLO do, I think is really, really important. But I also wanted to say that I think in terms of, coming out to protest in LA, we have kind of a unique situation, I think, in Los Angeles, in the sense that the whole notion of protest got drawn into a governmental strategy, right? Where like they knew they'll come in and do some absolutely egregious, outrageous, horrific things, and everybody's going to come out and protest, which is exactly what they wanted us to do, so that they could then send in, the Marines and the blah, blah, and do the whole charade for a problem that never existed in the first place. And we need some strategizing around that. We need to think about what we're doing, because we're just playing into their hand. Like as those protests are happening, I'm saying, I want to go protest, and I don't want to go protest. I don't know what to do. I feel like this is we're giving them a gift by going out and protesting now somehow, and that's a really messed up situation that I think we need to be thinking a lot more deeply about before we just act. Thank you for putting CLO in the chat.
Thank you for highlighting that, Dr. Speed. So this is a really important thing. This happens in authoritarian governments. There's this chilling effect. They shock and awe. And they do things that escalate the sense that it's of fear. People are afraid. I have family members who are afraid. They have papers. They're light-skinned brown folks. They're afraid to go outside. Okay, we're maybe people would normally not feel that particular fear to just go to a concert, to go out. And so how do we unfreeze ourselves from this chilling effect? How do we not let ice freeze us in our tracks? How do we gain traction? How do we unstick that? And I'd love to hear in the chat, how are you unsticking yourself? What is helping you get out of the paralysis of analysis and into action? Shannon, and you both of you, you and Janene both hit a nail on the head, because you're also laying out that there's an enigma here. There's a setup, and we don't want to fall into the trap that's being laid for us. At the same time, if we just sit and become spectators, we also fall into that trap, right? So if you're in the chat, what is unsticking you? What's helping you gain a sense of motion? It could even be as simple as a workout routine, just something that gets you out of your doom scroll. I want to make sure we're getting into these tangibles while we figure out, or towards, the bigger analysis. Janene, Frankie, give us something to do.
I'll put my CNVP hat on here, man. And two things that I think we need to do. And the first one, every time I say it, I feel like an old hippie. I grew up here in Humboldt County. It's where we're at. And so we are surrounded by hippies, but maybe I heard it enough times, but it's like, it's the system, man. It's the system, right? Like, it's still true. That's still what the issue is. And so some of the things that we've heard coming out of our local area here that I think really kind of highlighted the need for us to engage. And I'm saying this with the big, hey man, the system's rigged. It's not built for us. It's systemically and inherently a white supremacist racist system from the get-go. But while it still exists, you can't not fight, right? This isn't a time to be like, oh, it's messed up, call it a day. It has to be multi-leveled, it has to be multi-pronged, and one of those prongs is using the system that currently is available to us. It matters who the president is, clearly. Clearly, it matters who the president is. Clearly, that's a vote that we all need to engage in and shift. It sets the tone. So does your county supervisor. So does your school board. For God's sake, so does your local sheriff, right? These positions that most minorities and natives and others, we kind of like look the other way on, or we don't engage on. What we're seeing now, absolutely every single step in our electoral system is important. And the closer to the ground it gets, the more important it is for your community, and the more we should be actively engaging. I'm super proud of our local sheriff up here, who we really, as tribal people, riddled on and put to the fire on, making sure that they were going to really step up for us. And they have, right? they have stepped up. They said, this isn't us. We're not doing this. This is our community. We're not partaking in any of this part of what's happening with the ICE raids here in California. I think actively we have to be engaged on every single vote on the ballot. The closer to the floor it is to you, the more important it is, the more we should be engaging, the more we should be uplifting our people of brown and black people, getting in those positions so we can change that systemically. 100%. So we've got to engage at the local level. We need to engage at the state level, and then obviously I think there is an overarching listen. We've got to start voting better people in who are making these decisions across the board, and that means building a lot of collaboration between communities. Right? We're seeing this across the board. We need to kind of come together at some point, specifically as Indigenous people. We need to lead. I think the second part, from a Native perspective, from my perspective, having sat on tribal council for years and years and years, um, we need our people to engage, right? Like we need our tribal governments to engage on these issues to really see the connection. And I think there is a laundry list of reasons why tribes didn't actively engage like they should in the Black Lives Movement, didn't actively engage now on the undocumented issues. I think there's plenty of excuses why we don't, and good reasons why we don't push ourselves out there based on a history. But at some point, looking at the capacity of tribes in California, $46 billion industry we have as tribal governments, right? We have paid our way into the democratic system. We donate millions and millions of dollars to the system to ensure that we continue to be able to game and we continue to be able to protect our sovereignty. We really need to be starting to push our own people to lean into these conversations, to lean into what we have. And I'll leave it at this like one extreme, right? There's 109, about ready to be 110 federally recognized tribes in California. All of them set their own membership. If one of them was able to move beyond the space they're in, we could document every single person in California and give access to everyone under our own organizational structure, right? Like that's kind of like wild. Like, would we do that? But within this framework, we could, right? We absolutely, to our own self-determination and sovereignty, say, no, we're good. Every person on the North American continent is now our people. You're all documented. Full stop. End of story. Fucking done with the conversation. We need to do something like that. I think we need to have these like tectonic shifts in our conversation. And my apologies for my grandma's being here in my ear.
Frankie, thank you so much for sharing that. You got some snaps, claps, and whoos. I could just feel them coming off the chat. Thank you for highlighting the need to get involved in engaging electoral politics at every level, from the most local to the federal, and also highlighting the importance of collaboration. And one really important idea, we could just fix it together right now, right? So looking at our power, right? It's not a deficit model of, look, how are we? They want us to look at ourselves as not powerful, right? And to think in a limited frame, but we're expanding the frame, and I love that. Two things I wanted to share from the chat that are popping up, and it's really this whole question around participation and action. It's a really deep one, because a lot of people are not engaged in politics. They're engaged in comedy, sports, beating, all number of activities where they get together with people. We're also in a crisis of social participation. We've become kind of atomized as a society. Of we're on Netflix watching our own individual playlists and our own individual earpods and our own individual XYZ. So how do we come back to this collective action? And Diana in the chat here shared a really beautiful practice. She said, I refuse to look at news alone, right? I'm gonna just summarize for time, but she's talking about how doom scrolling can create this sense when you're watching the news, that instead of motivating you to action, it can become a kind of poison and cause you to be not act. And so she's decided to watch the news only with friends, to build community when looking at what's happening out there in the world. So I love that we're looking at these sort of political engagement points, and we're also looking at the personal. How do we organize our own feelings and our own self so that we can participate. Janene and Shannon, please dive on in. What do we do about what's happening right now? What can we do?
Well, the first thing I mean, there's actually a lot we can do. I know that so much of this is triggering. I feel it too. I also have those feelings of like the doom scrolling setting into my bones. But it's important to remember that it's triggering for many of us because of the historical trauma that lives inside of us. But alongside that is our historical resilience and strength and ingeniousness of surviving even the toughest of circumstances. And we can reroute ourselves in that too, you know, we can, and like, I don't think the fear is a bad thing. The fear also comes from a place of love. It comes from a place of understanding. It comes from a place of feeling that connectedness, that reminds us of our humanity. And it's important to acknowledge it, to feel it, to do whatever you need to do to move through those feelings. And one of the most important things, and what you're saying, you know, what Frankie was suggesting is like an exercise of our imaginations. One of the most important things I've learned from Indigenous peoples and many different places around the globe, and through ceremony and through prayer and just through like local place-based wisdom, is that one of the things that colonization has tried and very nearly completely devastated is our ability to imagine. There's an intentionality and colonizing narratives, languages, ways of thinking, ways of being, ways of doing. And a lot of that is to control what we imagine possible. And so as overwhelming as these things may be, as the images and the sense of like there not being enough happening fast enough, quickly enough, because we're dealing with all this in the midst of an ongoing genocide of our relatives in Gaza and in Palestine, it's important to hold on to your own vision of what our collective and shared liberation looks like, to not let this take that away from you. Because if we do let them take the vision of what is possible for us about how we imagine a world without borders, a world beyond settler colonial capitalism, a world where we restore like our relationships across Turtle Island, a world where we have food security for everyone, a world where we have access to shelter, a world where we have access to meaningful, purposeful, like place-based, earth-based education that reminds us how to be good relatives to each other, then we're giving them the tools. We're giving them the power that they're using with their violence and fear. And it's so important to recognize that the violence itself is not an indication of superiority. And in fact, like the violence used by colonizers is the very indication to show just how freaking primitive they are. And like violence is easy. Like they're like, I mean, I've heard this proverb, and it's been attributed to Africa, but like they, you know, they say they're lucky that we want peace and not revenge, right? Like it's not that we're not capable of the same type of violence. It's that that's never been our goal. That has never been our wisdom and our understanding for how to get to the place of liberation that our people truly deserve, that our future generations truly deserve. And our principled, disciplined, organizing and commitment to kinship, to community, to land, to Mother Earth, to sacred life has kept us rooted in that path. And we got to stay rooted in that path. But yeah, like I think that always makes me like feel better. That always makes me feel stronger as a mother, as a daughter, as a relative, that so much of what we talked about what's needed for our relatives is just rooted in reminding us how to be the best relatives we can be. And it's not a secret thing. It's not something beyond us. And we don't have to organize or do some big thing to do that. We can start being that relative like wherever we're at. whatever we are doing, because it doesn't matter what it is. Our documented relatives, our Black and Brown relatives, our Indigenous peoples, we are in those spaces. Our fingerprint, our touch, our ingenuity, our creativity, our arts, our culture, our language, our resistance. We are rooted throughout this entire system, and so we can take it over. And we can make it evolve in the way that we need it to evolve. And that's and move it completely away from the roots of violence and white supremacy and supremacist values in general, heteropatriarchy. Like, we can move it away from that and just come back to being good relatives to each other.
Times 10.
I mean, honestly, I think we should just leave it right there. That was beautiful.
Yes.
Enough said.
I want to highlight that there is a lot shared here. There is a lot of deep wisdom. We don't necessarily need more words, probably more listening. And to your point, Janene, being a good relative. How can we be a good relative in this time? You already know what you're supposed to do. You already know something you can do. For those tangibly, like, Daniel, tell me, yeah, okay, I get it, be a good relative, but exactly what does it look like? What should I do? There is a really great resource list that CMVP created. It's statewide. It's here in the chat. And I'm gonna open it up right now and just read. It's got know your rights information. If you have an undocumented relative, somebody who's maybe their status is not as solid as yours, or maybe just as unsolid as yours, share these resources. There's immigration resources. There's rapid response networks. Look at this list, find the one nearest you, and save that number. So if you see something, you can say something and let your neighbors know. There's so many more ways to get involved. I mentioned mutual aid. You can come together with neighbors and buy some groceries or pack a bag. If you have a garden and you want to share do anything. To Janene's point, do anything. You will be doing so much more than nothing, and nothing is what keeps us frozen.
Let me add to that, Danny, real quick, just to remind folks, all of these resource numbers, almost all of them, it's a two-way street, right? If you need something, absolutely, these are the places to call. But they also take money, right? Like they're also, I think the vast majority of them are also good to call them up and be like, hey, I have some funds, send them my way. The number works both ways. You can call if you need stuff, but you can call if you want to give too. So just want to ping that as well. Currency is still good for resources.
Thank you for that. Dr. Speed, I think we're approaching the end of our time. Is there anything off the top, in addition to the importance of imagination, anything you want to add in terms of action, how we can do something with this time? And it doesn't have to be the jumping into just doing anything just to do it, but meaningfully, purposefully. What you got for us?
Just, I think what you've already said, do something, anything you can do. It's important that we act, and at the same time that we keep some of our energy and our focus on our collective liberation and a different way of living in the world.
Doctor, thank you so much for that. With that, I'm going to invite us, folks in the chat. We're closing up shop, but we want to end off in a good way. I'd love for folks in the chat. Shara, give us a send off if there's a word of encouragement that you all have. Something maybe when you wake up in your morning and you're trying to set your mind in a good place, in a good mind. What do you tell yourself to set yourself there, to empower yourself? Put it in the chat, and we're going to give a round robin here for our panelists to just give us a good word to send us off in a good way and inspire us. And what I want to add is I work with some neighbors in the neighborhood. We worked with a local market, and I'm going to put a flyer in the chat. It has a QR code. If you want to donate some money, that will go to groceries to day laborers in South Central Los Angeles. It's really tangible. So I'm going to add that, my local thing that some neighbors made, and I'm going to put that in the chat. Let's just start with Janene, and then we'll go Frankie and Dr. Speed on the way out. Closing, encouragement, wise word. Y'all are deep. Go for it.
I think it's been repeated a lot that, this is not our first rodeo. Even though many of the flavors may be different and more extreme. There have been people, especially mutual aid programs, community organizers that have been building organizations, grassroots strategies, for many years, if not generations. Seek them out and help them. There's no need to start from scratch. Sometimes, a lot of times that just means going to a community meeting and like being willing to wash the dishes. It's a great starting point, because it brings you back into, sharing those responsibilities of like the real everyday task that makes resistance possible. And so never undervalue the strength of that type of contribution, and find those that you want to learn from and help support them in their work.
Thank you. Frankie?
I think for me, it's this phrase, two of them. One of them, like, who am I? Like who am I, right? Like I think about what my father went through in his life. I think about what my grandmother went through in her life. And I think about this idea, this concept that as Indigenous people, as Yurok people, we have been stewarding and living in these places for tens and tens and tens of thousands of years, creating balance and restoring nature and creating ecosystems and building these amazing cultural lifeways that we express today for generations and generations. And the link has been handed down one to another, to another, to another until um, we live here in this present day. And it's like who am I, right? Like who am I to not do what every single person in my chain has done since the beginning of time, right? Like, if I give my whole life to stewarding the land and bringing our people forward, I will have done nothing but what we have done since the beginning of time. So, who am I, right? Who am I to do any less than that? And one phrase that comes from Yurok, we say "Tat we Sean," "Tat we Sean," and it kind of goes along with this idea, but it means it was what it was, it is what it is, it will be what it will be, and it's supposed to mean like you live your life, right? You be a good neighbor, you be a good person, and the things that are supposed to happen will happen. So those two, but appreciate the conversation with all of you all tonight. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Frankie. I'm going to lift up a couple things from the chat. Um, I've got from Diana, I need to survive to hold these efforts accountable. I tell myself this every morning. From Tina, like a willow, they can bend us, but they can't break us. Stronger together. From Janine, you may have met her on a Zoom such as this. They try to bury us, but they forgot we are seeds. Bars. Dr. Speed.
All of those things, beautiful. Just following what Frankie said, I think when I wake up in the morning and I'm tired and I'm like, I can't do one more thing, I can't get to that protest, I can't do whatever needs to be done today. I think about what our ancestors went through so that we could be here. And I would just say that when it's time to act and you're hesitating or you're tired or all the things, think about the ancestors.
Nyawa for that. Mine is like make it manageable. When I think about the big mountain that I have to climb and I think, oh, ice and government takeover and all this stuff, I try to bring it down to make it manageable. You have some collard greens in your garden, Daniel, they're growing. You can water those plants, snap some off, and share with your neighbors, right? Make it manageable. The marathon starts with walking to the corner, starts with waking up and getting out of your house. So make it manageable. Every harvest starts with a seed. Think about that one seed before you get lost in the trees and the weeds. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to come through. Our panelists, our amazing guests, Janene Yazzie, Frankie Myers, Shannon Speed, California Native Voting Project, Native Vote Project, here making this happen, bringing us together to have this important conversation. And like Mackenzie mentioned in the chat, even this dialogue itself, getting together and talking, reasoning together, encouraging each other. This is power. We're reminding ourselves we have power. It runs through us, and what we choose to do with it will be what it will be. Let's make it count. Let's make our time. You matter so much, not only to your parents, your grandparents, to yourselves, to us. We need each other. You are so beautiful, so powerful. Get out there and make history. We love you, everybody. Sending skana, good vibes to each and every one of you. Take care. Till next time. Ona.